Welcome everyone. How to work a sample piece using UK double crochet or US single crochet. So for our first sample piece we are going to be chaining 11. So refer back to the previous module of a simple chain stitch if you just want to practice that again. So chain 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11, and there's your 11 chains. And now we're going to work the sample piece. So this first stitch is known as a UK double, and in the US that's a single. So we're going to work a double crochet into the second chain from the hook. This chain here on your hook is known as your working loop or your working chain, so don't count this one. So we're going to look at the chains, and we're going to, initially for the first row, I'm going to refer to them as a bump, just so that you can see what I'm meaning. So this is your first bump and this is the second bump. So we're going to work a double crochet into the second chain from the hook. So count this first bump here and the second bump. Insert your hook underneath that bump. Grab your yarn and pull it through that first space there. So you've got 2 loops on your hook. Grab your yarn again. Hold on to it here with your thumb and first finger. Turn the head of the hook to face downwards and pull through both loops, and that's your first stitch created. So moving on, we're going to now work the second double crochet into the next stitch. Now as you can see here, there's a big gap there, and that's the base of the double crochet stitch that you've just worked. So ignore that and look at the next bump along, which is here. Insert your hook underneath that bump. Grab your yarn and pull it through that gap. You've got 2 loops on the hook. Grab your yarn, point the head of the hook downwards, hold on to it with your thumb and first finger, just to allow a little bit of ease on the stitches. You can pull it down and pull your hook through the 2 loops, and that's the second stitch. So let's do that again. You've got a big gap here. That's the base of the stitch that you've just worked, so ignore that one and move on to the next bump here. Insert your hook underneath, grab your yarn and pull it through that gap. Grab your yarn again and pull through both loops, and that's your next stitch. We'll do another one together. Ignore the big gap and move to the next bump along. Insert your hook underneath that bump, grab your yarn and pull it through that first space. Grab your yarn again. Don't forget to point the head of your hook downwards. That way that just allows it to go through the stitches a little bit easier. If you were to leave it that facing upwards, if you can see there, the hook's not going to go through the stitches. So just point it downwards and it will glide through those 2 loops. And that's your next stitch. So pause the video and carry on working along these next stitches, and I'll meet you back at the very last stitch and we'll work that one together. So we're on the very last stitch now, and this is the hardest part of working this sample piece, because it's just trying to find where that very last stitch is, and then as you work up the rest of the sample piece it will get easier. So you can just about see that last little bump there. You've got the big gap again, which is at the base of the stitch you've just worked, and then you've got a little bump there just at the very end. So insert your hook, grab your yarn and pull it through that gap. You've got 2 loops on the hook. Grab your yarn, point the head of your hook downwards and pull through those 2 loops. And that's your very first row. So well done. Now what we're going to do is we are going to chain 1 and then just turn your work so that everything's on the left hand side of your hook. We're going to work a double crochet into the very first space there, so it's into the bottom of the stitch that you've just created on the last row. If you turn your work, you can see the top of the stitches. Now they're beginning to look like V stitches, and that's because they're in the shape of a V. So insert your hook into that space. As you're doing that, just turn your work and just make sure that you have both legs of that stitch on your hook. Grab your yarn and pull it through. You've got 2 loops on the hook. Grab your yarn and pull through both loops. And that's your first stitch of that row, of row 2. So let's do that again. You can see the next gap. Insert your hook, just check that you've got both legs of the stitch on your hook. Grab your yarn and pull it through. You've got 2 loops on the hook. Grab your yarn and pull through both loops, and that's your second stitch. So let's do that again. Insert your hook, check that you've got both legs of the stitch, grab your yarn, pull it through, grab your yarn and pull through those 2 loops, and that's your next stitch. So you can see all the way along, these are the stitches that you're going to be inserting your hook into. Pull through, grab your yarn and pull through those 2 stitches. So pause the video and meet me back towards the end of the row here, and I'll work through this last stitch with you. So we're at the end of the row here, and a tip is to, whilst you're practicing, is to always count your stitches. I still count my stitches now, and I've been crocheting for quite some time, but if I'm working quite a big project, I would always count my stitches anyway. So let's do that together before we work in that last stitch of the row. So if you turn your work, you can see the V stitches on top, and that's what you can either count that way, or you can just turn your work and just count the stitches together like that. So let's do that together. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, So you've got 9, you should have 9 stitches at the moment. So we're going to work that last stitch, which will give you 10 stitches, which is correct. So turn your work, you can see that last V just there. And when you insert your hook, sometimes when you're at the very end of a row, you will only pick up one leg of the stitch. So just make sure that if that happens, like it's just done with me, just make sure that you carry on and make sure that the hook goes through that second leg of the stitch. Then you've got the 2 legs on your hook. Grab your yarn and pull it through. Grab your yarn again and pull through the last 2 loops. And there's your next row. So chain 1 and turn your work. And let's work a couple of stitches together. We're going to go into the very first space here. Insert your hook, and as you insert it, just check that you've got both legs of the stitch on your hook. Grab your yarn and pull it through. You've got 2 loops on the hook, grab your yarn and pull through both loops. Now, as you can see, as I'm working the piece, I'm always using my thumb and first finger to hold on to the piece that I'm creating, and that gives it just a little bit of tension where I can make the loop, the working loop on the hook, a little bit bigger if I need to. So always try and relax your hand here. That's where your yarn is coming through your fingers, and then I use this finger on my right hand to move, to guide the loop up and down the hook if I need to. So we'll carry on, we'll work the next double crochet stitch, which is into this next space here, and if you just turn it, you can see there's the stitch. Insert your hook, check you've got both legs of the stitch on the hook, grab your yarn and pull it through. Grab your yarn and pull through both loops on the hook, and that's your next stitch. Let's do one more. Look for the next stitch, which is here. Insert your hook, check that you have both legs of the stitch on the hook, grab your yarn, pull it through. You've got 2 loops on the hook, grab your yarn and pull through both loops. Now pause the video, work the next few stitches and meet me back towards the end, and we'll go through that last stitch together. So we're almost at the end of the row here. If I just lay the work down, you can just have a little look at it. You can see that it's keeping straight on this edge, and you can see that there's a bump sticking out here, so you know that there's a stitch there somewhere that you've got to work into. So turn your work and you can see that V, the very end there. Insert your hook, check that you've got both legs of the stitch on the hook, grab your yarn, pull it through, grab your yarn and pull through both loops on the hook, and that's your next row. So go ahead and work the next few rows on your own now. I'm going to work another 7 rows so that we have 10 rows altogether, and I'll meet you back and we can have a look at the sample piece together. Okay, so I've worked another 7 rows, which gives us 10 rows altogether, and this is how your sample piece should be looking. Don't worry if it's a different size. it depends on what yarn you've used and what size hook you've used. So, and everybody's tension is different, so don't worry about that. So it's a very pretty stitch on its own, and you could work a blanket up or whatever you wanted to, a washcloth, coaster. It's a lovely stitch on its own. What we will do now is I'll show you how to fasten off and how to weave in your ends. All you do is you make a chain, pull it out a little bit, the loop, grab your scissors, snip your yarn, and then just pull it, carry on pulling it through the stitch, and then just pull on it just to fasten it off. And that's it. You've done your first sample piece. Well done. So I'll show you how to weave in your ends, and then we can move on to the next piece. So thread your darning needle, and all I do is I just work into the top of the stitches. So you're not pushing the needle through to the front, you're just working into the top. So just grab a few stitches going along your work, and just do a couple more, just into the tops, so your needle isn't showing through to the other side, you're just grabbing the tops of the stitches and pull, and then work downwards. So just grab a couple of stitches, doesn't matter, you don't have to be straight, it can go a little bit diagonal. It's just that you're weaving the wool, you're weaving the yarn in so that it won't come undone, and then go back. So what you've done is you've made this shape, down, across, and back up again. And that way it won't come undone, because there's nothing worse than working you've made a really lovely blanket, you've spent hours on it, and then you find that your ends are starting to come undone. So just make sure you have a rule of 3. So across, down, and back again. You can't see it on the other side, and then just snip it off, and there's your piece. So you can go ahead and weave the ends in on this one, and then we'll move on to the next sample piece.